personal portraits painted in stitches, offcuts, embroidery, and all sorts of textiles. Billie Zangewa creates multi-layered, luminous images that tell quietly compelling stories. The artist has swapped her studio in South Africa for our studio here in the French capital to tell us more about her new collection of work. Billie Zangewa, hello.
Hi, Olivia.
Now, your latest exhibition is called Soldier of Love, and that's on show at the Templon Gallery here in Paris. And before we take a look at the visual aspect of the pieces, can you tell us a bit more about the themes in that work and its title? Because we don't often see those two ideas next to each other, that is military defence and
Yes.
love.
Well, the thing is that I called the show Soldier of Love because I feel that we live in very, very difficult times where there's a lot of pain and suffering that, people are inflicting against each other all over the world. And I feel like we've forgotten the basics, which is love of self, love of humanity, love of the world. And I feel that, I need to be part of that crusade or the army that brings love back. And the reason it's soldiering is because, in fact, people are a bit jaded. And there's this idea that considering love as the answer to all of man's sufferings is idealistic. And I don't believe that's true. I actually believe that it is possible that if we all focused on first loving ourselves and then giving that love out, that a lot of the suffering that we're experiencing today would go away.
Indeed. Well, let's take a look at some of that work. Here is a glimpse of Soldier of Love. Now, when I first saw your work, I thought they might be paintings or collage using paper, but in fact you work with fabric, and these are made of silk, I believe. What drew you to that technique, and how does it affect the way you create the images working with textiles?
Well, basically, just to get back to how you describe my work, I am very, very influenced by painting and also printmaking and collaging and in general just graphics. And I think really my work came together like that because of those two important components. And actually the way I work with the fabric is pretty much the way that I was trained to work in printmaking, where you start with, a drawing on a piece of paper, and then you use that as a template to transfer it into a print. So I've just kind of swapped ink and paper with fabric.
Now, working with fabric or embroidery, for that matter, sewing, as you say, has sometimes been relegated to the world of craft and not necessarily as respected as contemporary art. And it has been considered sometimes a feminine practice. Do you think these materials, the technique you use, mean that it conveys something more feminine?
Well, for me, it does, and it was very, very deliberate on my part, mainly because when I was at university, I was told that I shouldn't, make art that showed my identity as a woman, and I felt very, very offended, and I felt like the message that was being given to me was that there's something shameful about being a woman, and I felt that, it was important for me to rebel against these patriarchal ideas. And I thought, well, what can I do that's going to be as female as possible? But then I'm going to seduce them by making it, conceptual, contemporary, and fine art. So they can't actually dispute the fact that it is art and call it craft. I mean, I will admit that in the beginning I was dismissed as just doing craft, but I persevered simply because, when you're an artist, you have to stand up against criticism, otherwise it's not really the right profession for you. So definitely for me, this is a statement. It's my feminist statement.
And much of your work is autobiographical, I believe. How comfortable are you telling your own story or giving people access to your life or your personal life through your art?
Well, the funny thing is that I'm actually a complete introvert. So I think this is like creating a balance for me in a way because, I'm so kind of closed in my everyday life and I stay at home a lot and I have very good friends and I don't let everyone in. But then I share my personal experiences with the world. So I think, that's just me really creating a kind of a balance in my identity so that I'm not completely closed or just revealing myself completely to everybody who comes around. Because my search is for connection. I feel that connection is also lost, with the whole, love not being the first thing we think about. I think connection has been lost. People are lonely, and they're sad and they feel isolated. And the way to connect with another person is to show your vulnerability. And a way to do that is to actually expose yourself and your private moments.
Indeed. Now, as I mentioned, you work in South Africa, and the African continent in all its diversity is currently the subject of an exhibition at the Pompidou Centre here in Paris, more specifically in terms of its relationship with China. Examining the economic ties between the two continental powers as well as their cultural dialogue, the show includes the work of Asian and African artists dealing with the post-colonial era in their respective societies. It's an exploration of a new space with new influences. Catherine Bennett and Karim Hakiki went to take a look.
From collective memory to intimate personal accounts, this exhibition at Paris's Pompidou Centre brings light to a dialogue between African and Asian artists, such as the collaboration between an Angolan and a Thai artist who met in Zimbabwe. Their work explores the country's dire economic situation.
When Prachia comes, he's starting looking to the newspaper and the idea is starting open. And we went to street outside and start to see the Zimbabwean signs. People put a lot of signs on the trees, like people without job.
We start the project in order to understand, our practice and also understand the situation and be able to share with other artists, other people.
The exhibition also examines how Africa tried to forge new relationships in the aftermath of decolonization. Artist François-Xavier Bray depicts a swimming pool in Bamako, built by the USSR in 1969 for the first African Games, which were cancelled. It fell into disuse until the Chinese arrived. Recently, China also poured 30 million euros into the Museum of Black Civilizations in Dakar. Examples of how the continent has become fertile ground for both Chinese investments and cultural influence. China's presence in Africa, though, is nothing new.
China's presence in Africa goes back further than you would think, so the exhibition is also a way of recontextualizing history. People think China's only had a presence in Africa for 10 or 15 years, but it's been much longer, and some pieces in the exhibition reference that.
Taiwanese artist Muskiki Chiing was inspired by Ming Dynasty coins found in an archaeological dig in Kenya, deconstructing typical narratives around the China-Africa relationship. A relationship that has transformed over the centuries. This exhibition asks whether Africa is liberated from colonialism or yoked once more by a new global power.
Now, that show brings together two perspectives that Western history of art has perhaps pushed to one side or ignored for a certain amount of time. And it's true that the reception of an artwork when it leaves its home culture does sometimes change to a certain extent. I know that you have work in the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art in Washington, and I wanted to ask you how you describe the response to your art in the United States, for example, or in France, once it left its home and was being shown abroad.
Well, I could be wrong on this, but my impression was that when my work came to France, it was more a case of, Black Venus. So, there's this amazing, powerful, incredible, Black woman who's representing herself in a very positive light. And then in America, I seemed to touch the African American community because I was actually showing the intimate life of a Black person, which, wasn't really happening in America. And for them, it had an effective connection, but also in a way to kind of demystify Black lives because, there you are in your home doing just what everybody else does in their home.
Indeed. And now, as I said, your studio is based in Johannesburg. You grew up in Botswana and your family hails from both Malawi and South Africa. Would you say that you had something of a kind of pan-African experience? And if so, how does that feed into your work?
Well, definitely I had, I'm quite mixed in my perspectives and experiences. I don't have just the Malawian experience or the apartheid experience. In fact, I don't have the apartheid experience at all. And I think that's really what sets me apart from the other artists in South Africa is that they're kind of still dealing with the trauma, post-apartheid trauma. But I'm kind of, I'm at a level where I'm like universal love and promoting women and also, just kind of projecting positive images instead of just reliving the trauma, because I do feel that after a while, reliving trauma can actually have, the opposite effect, and then it stops you from moving on. So I guess that's really what my images are doing, is creating some kind of a balance between depicting the images of trauma and how it's affected people, and, being an African who has family that were traumatized, but then I wasn't, and then, what is my African perspective and experience? And really merging the two as the total experience.
Now, finally, we asked you to point us in the direction of an artistic project or event that we should check out. And you flagged up the Social Impact Arts Prize, which takes in 6 different arts initiatives in South Africa. And one of those projects in particular caught your eye. Tell us more.
Well, it's called Hello Walk. I don't know if it's Walk like in Afrikaans, but I call it Walk because I'm Anglophone. But and it's, for me, it's what I call a digital cloud. So basically, it's like this fiber cloud tech thing that takes moisture from the air, and then they use that moisture to water plants. But it's also like this big, kind of like a, Wi-Fi hub, so that the people in the area can actually connect to it and then connect to each other. So I just love the idea of like tech and kind of like the environment coming together. I think it's a really beautiful thing. And then for it to actually manifest in like the most beautiful, beautiful tech cloud. That's the only way I can, describe it.
That does sound like a very innovative fusion of art and technology. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Billie.
Thank you, Olivia.
Now, Billie Zangewa's work is currently on show at the Galerie Templon here in Paris. And if you're in South Africa, you can see the Social Impact Arts Prize at the Rupert Museum in Stellenbosch. If not, we'll leave you with a little look at some of that work. Do remember you can get more arts and culture on our website, and we're also on social media too. There's more news coming up on France 24 just after this.
The Kenyan authorities say they're doing all they can to stem the scourge of drugs. But in the port city of Mombasa, you can get anything. Cocaine, heroin, you name it. The lure of easy money has penetrated right to the heart of the police.
When we take them back to their station, we're threatened by certain superiors. Some chiefs receive bribes from the big drug traffickers.
Our reporters spent weeks with Mombasa's addicts, drug mules and the police. They paint a somber picture of East Africa's biggest port, now an international drugs hub.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.